The air inside the temple of Anubis was thick with incense, the scent of burning myrrh, mixing with the heavy silence of death. Torches flickered along the stone walls, casting eerie shadows on the sacred carvings that warned of eternal damnation. On a grand stone slab lay Queen Neferet, her body still, her face frozen in the beauty that had once captivated an empire. But her soul was far from at peace. The high priest, Rahotep, stood over her, his golden headdress gleaming under the firelight. His voice echoed through the chamber as he chanted the final rites. For her crimes against the pharaoh, for the blood she has spilled, for the power she sought, let her slumber in darkness forever. The priests around him moved in unison, their hands covered in sacred oils as they wrapped Neferet's body in linen soaked with enchanted resins. But this was no ordinary mummification. This was a curse, one meant to trap her soul between the worlds, ensuring that she could never rise again. Neferet had once been beloved, a queen of unmatched beauty and cunning. But when she sought to overthrow her husband, the great Pharaoh Setek, she was betrayed by her own court. For treason, she was sentenced to a fate worse than death. "Seal her in the tomb," Rahotep commanded. The priests lifted the golden sarcophagus, its lid engraved with Neferet's own image, her painted eyes seeming to watch them even in death. They carried it deep into the tomb, placing it within a chamber lined with hieroglyphs of warning. "Let no man disturb her slumber, lest he awaken a hunger that can never be satisfied," Rahotep whispered, his fingers trembling as he placed the final sigil upon the sarcophagus. Then, with heavy hearts and fearful whispers, the priests sealed the chamber. The world moved on. The sands of time buried the tomb, and Neferet's name faded from history. But she was not dead. She was waiting. For centuries, Queen Neferet lay in silence, entombed beneath the shifting sands of Egypt. Time swallowed her name, her crimes, and the warnings etched upon her sarcophagus. But fate had not forgotten her. The year was 1923, and deep in the Valley of Kings, a group of archaeologists stood before an entrance that had been hidden for millennia. Dr. Julian Carter, an ambitious Egyptologist, wiped the sweat from his brow as his team carefully chiseled away at the sealed stone doorway. "This is it," he whispered, his heart pounding, "the lost tomb of a forgotten queen." Beside him, his assistant Eleanor Graves studied the carvings with a frown. The hieroglyphs were different from any she had seen before. "Julian, look at this." She traced the symbols with her fingers. "Do not enter. Let her rest. The hunger cannot be stopped." Julian chuckled, shaking his head. "A curse? Eleanor, you're smarter than that. It's just a myth." With a final strike, the seal cracked open. A gust of stale air rushed out, carrying with it the scent of ancient death. The torches flickered. Then, silence. One of the workers, Hassan, stepped back nervously. "We should not be here," he muttered in Arabic. "This place is not meant for the living." Julian ignored him. With cautious steps, he entered the tomb, his lantern casting a golden glow over walls covered in hieroglyphs. Statues of Anubis and Osiris stood like silent guardians. Then they saw it. A golden sarcophagus, untouched by time. The image of Queen Neferet stared back at them, her painted eyes gleaming as if she knew they had come. Eleanor's stomach tightened. "I don't like this, Julian." But Julian was already brushing dust from the lid, his excitement overtaking caution. "Eleanor, don't you see? This will make history." His fingers traced the ancient seals. Then, with a determined breath, he pushed the lid open. A gust of cold air rushed out, extinguishing the lanterns. The room was swallowed in darkness, and from the sarcophagus, a whisper slithered through the chamber. "At last!" Eleanor screamed. A cold gust of air rushed through the tomb as the last flickering torch was snuffed out. Darkness swallowed the chamber, thick and suffocating. Then, a breath. Not from Julian, not from Eleanor, but from inside the sarcophagus. Eleanor's scream echoed through the chamber, but Julian stood frozen, eyes wide as he watched the golden coffin. The body inside was moving. A dry, cracking sound filled the air as centuries-old linen wrappings shifted. Dust swirled around them, and the scent of decay and something worse, something ancient, seeped into their lungs. Hassan and the workers ran, stumbling over fallen stones in their desperate escape. But Julian couldn't move. A hand emerged from the sarcophagus, long, skeletal fingers wrapped in blackened bandages. The wrappings unraveled, revealing skin that should have long since turned to dust. But instead, it was gray, leathery, and pulsing as if something inside still lived. Neferet had awakened. Her sunken eyes snapped open, glowing a deep, unnatural gold like embers burning in the darkness. Her lips cracked apart, revealing blackened teeth, and when she spoke, her voice was not a whisper, but a hiss, an ancient hunger-given sound. Who dares disturb my slumber? Eleanor grabbed Julian's arm, yanking him backward as the mummified queen sat upright, her head tilting unnaturally. Julian, we have to go. Eleanor's voice was sharp with terror, but Julian didn't move. He was entranced. It's her, he whispered. She's real. Neferet's head turned toward him too fast, too unnatural. Something hungry slithered behind those golden eyes. Her body twitched as she pulled herself up, her bones cracking like dried reeds. Her feet touched the ground, and where she stepped, the stone darkened, rotting beneath her. She lifted her rotting fingers, reaching toward Julian. You have freed me. Her mouth stretched into a horrifying grin. And now, you shall feed me. Julian gasped as if the air had suddenly been stolen from his lungs. His body stiffened, his skin turning pale. Eleanor watched in horror as Julian's veins turned black, spreading like ink under his skin. His eyes rolled back, his lips parted in a silent scream. Then, in a blink, his body withered. His flesh shrank, his skin cracking like old parchment, his muscles collapsing inward as if something was draining the life from him. And Neferet? She breathed in deeply, her decayed skin growing stronger, her body restoring itself with every stolen drop of life. Julian fell to the ground, nothing more than a dried husk. Eleanor choked on a sob. Neferet turned toward her, her glowing eyes filled with hunger. More, the queen whispered. Eleanor ran. Eleanor sprinted through the dark corridors of the tomb, her breath ragged, her heart pounding like a war drum. Behind her, footsteps echoed, slow and deliberate. Queen Neferet did not run. She stalked. You cannot run forever. The queen's voice was a hiss, slithering through the air like a serpent. Eleanor tripped over a loose stone, crashing to the ground. The sound of sand shifting made her whip around. Neferet was closer now, her once decrepit body stronger, her skin no longer gray and rotted, but dark and smooth, reborn from the life she had drained from Julian. Eleanor crawled backward, her hands scraping against the stone floor. Please, she gasped. Neferet tilted her head, studying her like a lion sizing up its prey. Do you beg, little one? The same way I begged for mercy when they entombed me? Her fingers stretched, black veins slithering up her arms. I was left to starve, to wither, to die. Her eyes burned gold, filled with a hunger that had no end. Now, I take back what was stolen. Neferet lunged. Eleanor screamed. But before the queen's fingers could touch her, a torch burst into flame. Neferet shrieked, recoiling as the fire illuminated the chamber. Eleanor turned to see Hassan, gripping an oil-soaked torch, his face pale but determined. Get up, he yelled. Eleanor did not hesitate. She scrambled to her feet as Neferet's golden eyes flickered with rage. You think fire can stop me? She snarled. Hassan grabbed Eleanor's wrist. It won't stop you, he admitted, but it will burn this tomb to the ground. He threw the torch. The flames erupted, catching on the dried scrolls, the old wrappings, the walls covered in resin. Fire raced through the chamber. The tomb was coming down. Neferet let out an inhuman scream, her voice twisting into something unnatural. No, Eleanor and Hassan ran, diving through the collapsing passage as the fire roared behind them. Outside, the desert night was silent. Eleanor and Hassan collapsed onto the sand, coughing, their lungs filled with smoke. Behind them, the entrance to the tomb was now nothing but rubble. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, a hand broke through the sand. Eleanor's blood ran cold. "No," she whispered. Neferet's fingers clawed their way out, her golden eyes glowing beneath the dirt. "Did you think you could bury me? Again?" Her voice rasped, more furious than before. Hassan grabbed Eleanor's hand. "We have to go!" Eleanor didn't move. Her mind raced. Fire had failed. The tomb had failed. Nothing could kill Neferet, because she was never meant to die. Her hunger was eternal. Eleanor turned, locking eyes with the reborn queen. "You will never stop, will you?" Neferet smiled. "Not until the world belongs to me once more." Eleanor's fists clenched. "Then we will make sure no one ever finds you again." By sunrise, the tomb was gone. Hassan and Eleanor erased all traces of its existence. No maps, no records, no signs that it had ever been found. They buried it deeper, sealing away the queen who could not die. But Eleanor knew the truth. Neferet was still there, buried beneath the sands, waiting. And someday, she would rise again,